प्लिज म्युट गरिदिनु होला अब हामी लाइभमा जाँदैछौँ Okay, namaste, welcome and namaste all of you. I would like to formally welcome Professor David Gellner and Dr. Krishna Adhikari from Oxford University, UK. My greetings and welcome to all the dignitaries and we have been watching Facebook and YouTube live now. I am Mom Biswakarma. I am currently involved in research at the University of Sydney and teaching at the different university in Australia. I've been contributing to the contemporary Dalit movement in Nepal through articles, research, and publications. I have also published a book entitled Political Transformation in Nepal, Dalit Inequality and Social Justice from Routledge, UK. This webinar series has been conducted by the Services for Research and Development Institute Australia. This is an institute set up to support development through research-based services. Today, we are discussing on the issues of Dalit migration and intercaste relations. After this discussion, we also intend to prepare a policy brief and submit it to Government of Nepal, and we'll also publish book. As you all know that the Nepali society is highly structured and divided by the caste hierarchy. The division of hierarchy and lower and purity and non-purity has been major social problem, even though the contribution of new constitution of Nepal 2015, including its subsidiary laws, have been outlawed the caste discrimination. As consequences of conservative caste hierarchy and discriminatory practices, many Dalits have been trashed, killed, verbally abused, raped, and deprived from basic human rights. One of the key examples of heinous caste crime of Nepal is a recent mass lynching of Dalit youths in Rukum, Nepal. These are just few examples of caste hegemony and Dalit human rights violation in Nepal. However, questions raises whether there is no changes in Nepal or are there any signs of positive inter-caste relation? What are the underlying factors for changing inter-caste relation in Nepal? In order to answer these questions, Professor David Gellner and Dr. Krishna Adhikari from Oxford University are presenting their empirical evidences on Dalit migration and inter-caste relations. This presentation is based on field research in Nepal. David Gellner is Professor of Social Anthropology and a Fellow of All Souls College in the University of Oxford. He has edited volumes Borderland Lives in Northern South Asia, Religion, Secularism, and Ethnicity in Contemporary Nepal, and Global Nepalis, Religion, Culture, and Community in a New and Old Diaspora in 2013, 2016, and 2018, respectively. He has worked on religion, politics, ethnicity, and social change in Nepal since 1981 and was Principal Investigator of the Class, Caste, and Culture project. Dr. Krishna Adhikari is also a research fellow at the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology of Oxford University and co-investigator of the ESRC-funded project, Caste, Class, and Culture, changing Bahaun and Dalit identity in Nepal. It was 2013 to 2017 research. After 12 years as a practitioner and manager in the field of rural development, he did a PhD at the University of Reading in 2007 on the dynamics of social capital and community institution. He edited Nepalis in the United Kingdom, an overview published by Center for Nepal Studies UK in 2012. Now let's welcome Professor David Gellner and Dr. Krishna Adhikari for the presentation. Welcome, Professor David Gellner.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mungji, for that kind introduction. I will speak first for the first few slides, and then I will hand over to Krishna. हामीले द्वैभाषिक policy गरौँ, मतलब यहाँको स्लाइड धेरै जसो अङ्ग्रेजीमा छ, तर नेपालीमा पनि छन्, अनि यहाँ उपस्थितहरू सबैलाई नेपाली कुरा आउँछ मेरो पिछामा, त्यस कारणले जुन पनि भाषा राम्रो हुन्छ। सो म त 40 वर्षदेखि 44 सबभन्दा पहिला नेपालमा आउँदाखेरि 1976 मा, तपाईहरुको जन्म भएको छैन होला त्यस बेलामा, त्यसमा पुरै पञ्चायतको काल थियो, अनि पोखरा त्यस बेला एउटा सानो गाउँ जस्तै, काठमाडौँ पनि, अनि त्यस बेलादेखि अहिलेसम्म ठुलो परिवर्तन अवश्य भइसकेको छ। सो हाम्रो यो ठुलो ESRC को 4 वर्ष लामो को योजनामा एउटा कास्की जिल्लाको एउटा BDC मा हामी चलिरहेको थियो, अनि हाम्रो I was the Principal Investigator, Krishna ji Co-Investigator, अनि full-time सहकर्म गर्ने यहाँ उपस्थित अर्जुन बहादुर बिके जी यही तस्बिरमा पनि छ, उहाँलाई हाम्रो ठुलो धन्यवाद छ। So can we go to the next slide, please? Oops. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
So this outlines the main objectives of the research as proposed to the UK's Economic and Social Research Council. हाम्रो आइडिया के थियो भनेदेखि खाली दलितमा केन्द्रित मात्र भयो भने अलि मिल्दैन थियो समाजशास्त्रको दृष्टिकोणबाट. So we want to take all of the society and also to look at Baals and Dalits in relationship to each other as well as other local groups. And Udeshya 2 number, we were there's been a lot of attention on Janajati groups in Nepal and in the anthropology of Nepal. It was perhaps, I mean, it's sometimes many times you hear people say, oh, nobody has studied Parvatiya, nobody has studied Banshetri. This is wrong. It's not true. There have been some very distinguished studies, but nonetheless, I think it is fair to say that the balance of anthropological attention, the bulk has been on the marked categories, as I say, what are now called Janajati. So we want to kind of shift and to look at the thing in the round. And finally, I mean, we were not going to talk much about this today, but we can talk about it in discussion, if you like, is we wanted to test some ideas from the great French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu about cultural capital, and to see what one might call samskritik punji. Does it have any role to play in the explanation of inequality in Nepal or not? And so our ambition was to try and say something new in the study of Dalits in Nepal. And so it's certainly true that Dalits have not been studied as much as they should have been, given there are 1 or 2 honorable exceptions. But in terms of anthropological study, they have not been studied as much as they should have been. And so we certainly wanted to contribute to that. Okay, next slide, please. We've also subsequently, since the end of that funding, done several other smaller projects, including one which we call Dalits in the school curriculum. And here you can see Krishnaji carrying out some trialing of new lessons about Dalits in the school curriculum. So it is not the case that the caste system or the Dalit issue is totally absent from the school curriculum, but there is certainly room for improvement, and working together with the 3 schools in Kaski Jilla, and also working together with the local education representatives, and taking advantage of the new situation with the new federal system with devolved responsibility for educational matters. We were able to make some suggestions and have some input, which we hope will have some impact in the future. And in both this project and the next one I'm going to talk about, we were working together with the Samanta Foundation. So the current project is funded by the British Academy. Indirectly, it's GCRF money, that's British aid money. We wanted to look specifically at the position of Dalits in the far west of Nepal, and also to carry forward the way of studying and the methodologies that we'd worked out in the big ESRC project, carry that forward, test it out in the far west of Nepal. Because what we're talking about today, the content of today's talk is very much about Kaski district. Kaski, of course, is not typical. I mean, it's typical it's probably typical of many areas in the central hills of Nepal, but in terms of cultural development, in terms of levels of human development, it is definitely better off than many places in the West. And Krishna has just spent a month in the far West recently to start this project off. You can talk about this, the stereotype, the big stereotype that the far West is more conservative socially and culturally is certainly has a lot of truth in it, but we want to obviously try and dig beneath the stereotypes. Of course, this project has been hit hard by the lockdown, and we're struggling at the moment with the issues of how to continue that. Okay, next slide, please. So this particular paper is we want to look at Dalit, non-Dalit relations, and to see what role, if any, labor migration of various sorts, whether temporary, whether permanent, has on intercaste relations. And we're particularly focusing on the Bali Ghore system, what in anthropological literature is known as the Jajmani system, what in far west Nepal is known as the Riti Bhagya system, whether that, in what way that has been transformed, and whether the labor migration has any role in that transformation. And interestingly, I mean, Krishna may talk about this in a bit, just recently, because of lockdown, there are signs that, this is not a one-way decline story. There may, there may be eddies, there may be countercurrents, there may be changes. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the outline of the presentation. Some very brief mention of the background to the caste system of Nepal. Our present audience hardly needs that, so that will be very brief. Then there'll be quite some detail about the actual project itself and the field site, and the methods, specifically the surveys. And now let me say, we were the project was a 4-year-long project. Krishna was living there for most of that 4 years. Arjunji also was living there for over 2 years. I visited on many occasions. So there is lots and lots of qualitative participant observation data. We have a lot of in-depth interviews and so on. But what we're going to concentrate here is the more quantitative side, because well, some of those figures are interesting, and what one always hopes is that quantitative data will produce results that you couldn't predict or that you might not have been expecting, and that the quantitative might have some kind of persuasiveness that sort of an individual story won't. But of course, I'm an anthropologist. I'm not going to say that is the only way. I'm certainly not dismissing qualitative research at all. On the contrary. So then finally we get to the meat of the paper, the caste relations exactly abroad and at home. And then finally, hopefully there will be time for some discussion of the way in which caste inflects relationships of livelihoods and remittances and class, and then we'll come to the conclusions. Okay, next slide, please. So, Krishnaji, do you want to take over at this point? And Krishna, you're still on mute.
Namaste. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Right. I'm not quite sure which language to use here. I think I've seen a couple of friends who might not understand Nepali, but I hope everyone would understand English. Some of our slides are in Nepali and some of our slides are in English. So it's going to be kind of mixed language regime today. Thank you, David, for the background. I don't think I need to run through the details about the Dalits history in Nepal, because many people in the audience here, I see that, that they are the gurus who taught me about the lives, sufferings, experiences of being a Dalit. So I think it would be, in a way, insult to try to explain that. But I would like to briefly recap in this slide that the Nepal's official population of Dalits is 13.2%, but many Dalit activists we met, they claim that this is the undercount and it could be as high as 20%. Since this research is concentrated on in the hills of Nepal, and we cover Vishwakarma, Pariyar, and Mijar, who identify as Nepali in the part that we did research, and in more standard terms are understood as Mijar as well. Their population in Nepal is Hill Dalits population in Nepal is 8.1%. Caste systems is there for many centuries, but 1854's legal code instituted by Jangabad Rana after his trip to Europe, Mulki and legalized hierarchy, put everybody into the caste fold, and that's how it became kind of the hardened system we are still grappling with today. In 1964, it was Panchayat time. With the initiative of the King Mahendra, caste system was outlawed, but caste system continued. And the traditional practices were protected. That means like people were free to practice, continue their practices. So there were not big changes. And it was in 1990 when we had this democratic change. That's the first time that the caste, caste system was more legally outlawed, and it is only in 2006 Nepal declared itself as a Chwachot of the untouchability free country, and 2003 onwards. So these pop-up things disturbing. Onwards, Nepal started practicing reservations and proportional representation systems. Mainly, I think it was instituted through the Civil Servants Act 2007. So Nepal now practices reservations and in civil service, in politics, and that continues. And it's also the subject of debate. And in 2011, the Caste-based Discrimination and Untouchability Offence and Punishment Act was instituted. This gave real tooth to the law. Anybody violating caste rules, discriminating people based on the caste can be punished. and with growing activism from the Dalit community and those supporting those movements, now we can see more and more cases of punishment and litigation. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot capture from the Nepal Human Development Report 2014. This single slide should be enough to show that the Dalits' life expectancy, educational level, and income level is one of the lowest in Nepal, and that speaks of volume of their whole situation in every front, socio-cultural and economic fronts. And Madhesi Dalits are even have even the lowest human development index. Of course, there are Muslims and other groups, but I think this sum ups the the development state, socio-cultural status, economic status of the Dalits living in Nepal compared to other groups. Next slide, please. Right, some of the presentations today has been reported to this recently published special issue in the contributions to Nepalese studies, published by CINAS. This is Center for Nepal and Asian Studies of the Tribhuvan University. Just after the volume came out, there was lockdown, and many people who are interested to read these articles, they haven't got this, but hopefully we'll be able to bring this to the market. So we have one chapter part in particular called International Labor Migration from Nepal and Changes in Intercaste Relations. So many points that we make today here have already been reported, but it would be very interesting to have discussions, and rather than making more analysis or making generalized points, we are trying to present facts so that people here can make judgment by themselves and we can discuss. Next slide, please. Right, this was based on the caste, class, and culture research project that we explained before, and many people were involved, as many as 48 people. And I think it is important to highlight that we only report some part of the whole research we carried out. For example, in this presentation, we do not report anything about the cultural consumption aspects, and the enumerators who went and interviewed people were from the community concerned themselves, and they were trained for many days. Next slide, please. Next slide. Right, the research we carried out was in a BDC in Kaski district, and now we have got rural municipality, and these places have been converted into wards. And it was by population, it was Bahun dominated. They have over 50% population there. And Dalits population was about 25% in total. But in order to balance the number in our sample, we try to reduce those numbers. The sample households we cover was 30% was Bahuns, 14 Chatris, 13% Gurungs, 21% Vishwakarma, 14% Pariyar. I can't see the last button part. I don't know. And there were Mijars as well. Next slide, please. And this slide also shows that we applied mixed methods, and most of the results we are reporting today are based on quantitative survey. The survey was conducted in 7 villages of origins, covering major caste groups, including three Dalit groups and 2 Brahmin groups, 1 group, Gurung ethnic group, and a Kshatriya group. Then we also develop kind of the migration pathways. We do genealogies, and we try to follow people in the migration destinations. The population, I think we covered total 630 plus households and 3,100 plus population there. Next slide, please. Right, this shows, this table shows that the total household we covered by caste groups. And on the right-hand side are the individuals that were randomly selected from the census households, and 1,203 individuals were selected. People who were 13 years or older were included in the survey, and the survey covered education, learning and skills, migration, cultural consumption, mobile, radio, TV, films, reading, music, sports, general recreation and leisure, internet use, and customs were kind of things that they included in the cultural consumption. Next slide. This simply shows the distribution of our sample and population. The left, the double pie, the inner one is the population. Red color shows those not migrated, and the blue is migrated. So 42% of the population we cover are in fact migrated. Some are temporarily migrated, others are more permanently migrated. And the outer ring is for sample, and 61% of the people included in the sample were in the village of origin, and 39% were in the migration destinations. And on the right-hand side, this gives more breakdown of the the people's location. The bottom shows the people migrated to the same district, rural area, and the red just above that shows other districts, and green shows urban migration, and above that the white part shows the migration abroad. I mean, we didn't visit international destinations to do the survey, so anybody we can capture were the returning migrants. Either they were on the leave or they were in the what they call the finished visa. So we were able to include some of those, and the top bar shows they not migrated. Next slide. I mean, migration has been such a prolific concept, and I think Mom's presentation, Ramesh Sunam, did a very detailed presentation on migration itself. But we were interested to understand whether the migration is even though we know migration is not a new phenomena, but what was the extent of migration in the past? We tried to find out and ask people that if there were anybody in the family in the past 2 generations, who had migrated away from Nepal. And in our research area, 35% of the household reported that there was at least somebody in the family who had migrated, and 3/4 of them were in India, and some people were in Burma, maybe some went to Bhutan, but largely it was in India. And also the large number of people from Kaski, like other hill districts, they migrated to Tarai once the Tarai was declared suitable for habitation, and people from hill were encouraged. So 45% of the household reported that at least someone in the past 2 generations had migrated permanently away. As we know that nationally, more recently as well, all groups from the hill have migrated to urban centers and to Tarai. For example, like Bahuns, 1 in 4 Bahuns now have migrated to urban centers, and 2 in 5 to Tarai. Sorry. 2 in 5 have migrated to Tarai, and similarly Vishwakarma, Pariyar, Nepalis, even Gurungs, they have migrated to different rates. Next slide, please. And we wanted to find out of the current family, the migration ratio, especially the international migration. And this slide is in Nepali. I hope you will be able to read this. So we have listed the family. Right. There's a pop-up from Ramesh Sunam here. Families with at least one member who had been away as an international migrant, labor migrant. And the blue part shows those households with somebody, at least someone who had been away, and that amber orange color shows the families that didn't have anyone who had been away. So looking at this, the Dalits proportion here is higher than others, except Gurungs. 78% households on average had at least one member who had been away in general, and Dalit average is 87%. Only Gurungs is 89 because their tradition of joining Indian and British Army, and lately migrating to Hong Kong and through Hong Kong to UK. And even currently, we found that at least 50% of household had at least someone abroad as a labor migrant, which is, I think, quite identical to the national figures shown by the Nepal Living Standards Survey 2010-11, 53%. This is based on the 620 household, including destination and villages of origin. Next slide. We have observed that there is more than one person from a family tries to go away. Many Dalit households we visited, that the people of, whenever they're adult and have the citizenship card, if there is a brother already, for example, in the Gulf, then a younger brother would also try to go. So we just wanted to find out what is the average family members who've been away at least once. And Gurungs have the highest number, which is 2.33% per household. And then it comes to Nepali Mijar. The Sarki group is a 1.5, Pariyar and Vishwakarma, then Chetri. So Bounce is the lowest. Not quite sure if this reflects the national figure. We haven't done any comparison, but this all shows that in a previous slide and this slide shows that the migration has been kind of a massive phenomena, and highly practiced by Dalits as well, even higher than others. Next slide, please. Okay, in a way, a quality of migration, we can say quality in a sense that the more advanced country you go, more maybe more earning, better living conditions, better working conditions in that sense. So we wanted to find out that the caste-wise what's the scenario. The top one, you can see the middle long bar, that is Gulf and Malaysia, and left red is India. I mean, there's one shift here. We'll see in the further coming slides that the migration in the past used to be mostly, as we have seen that the 3/4 of migration was in India, but that's not the case now. People almost stopped going to India, and now the most popular destinations have become Gulf and Malaysia. So the Vishwakarmas, the largest number, I think almost everybody have gone to Gulf and Malaysia, and very small number have been to more developed countries like Japan, West. Pariyars, there is still many people in India, but their share in Gulf and Malaysia is very high. Mijar's cases, I mean, this is could be very unique here. The Mijars in our study area are relatively richer, and they also have been able to go to countries like Korea, Japan. So that's why this green bar, longer bar on the right hand side. This Jamma is a kind of average of all castes. And at the bottom, the Gurungs there, and more numbers in more advanced countries. So this shows that the out of matter of interest that the Gulf and Malaysia are the countries where most of the caste groups, more popular destinations, and this is the places where they managed to go, but more popular for Dalits there because they cannot afford going to more advanced countries. Next slide, please. This is the times. First time international migration, just to show the trend of the current household members by year. And this is in Bikram Sambat. The leftmost is 1945 C and 2001 Bikram Sambat, just before, during the Rana time. So there were hardly anyone. Maybe there were a few people, Gorkhas there. Then it's continued to, it didn't grow much during Panchayat time, but after the 1990s advent of democratic system, we can see that it is going upwards. And the trend is growing until now. And there was, the data is until 2071. So 5 years, 6 years ago. Next slide. A number of times people go abroad. Right, a number of trips. The leftmost one means like the person who've been away only once or currently are away. And 20 means like that person have been back and forth 20 times. It could be with some breaks or without any breaks. So the trend is that people do repeat, but there are new entrants every time, and I think there are more and more new entrants who are interested to go away abroad, who have been going. Next slide. Right, coming to the second point on the caste relations, one of the themes we tried to explore was the caste relations abroad and caste relation at home. We asked people a question that if when they were abroad, if they had lived with the shared their rooms or work with other people, and they had roommates from the different caste ethnic groups from Nepal, like for example, like for Dalits, non-Dalits, and non-Dalits, it could be Dalits or Janjati groups, and 90% of the people in fact had mixed roommates or workmates. And then we also asked people that if they knew other person's caste status, how did they find out? And I think maybe you will find this interesting. It was 2 in 5 people self-identified, and almost similar number of people were identified through surnames. So that's the bulk of the people. I think 4 in 5 people were identified either through self-identification or through looking at their surnames. And as many Dalit friends and other people in Nepal have experienced that whenever you meet someone new, people tend to ask you, what's your caste or what's your they are very curious to find out, so that maybe they could treat them accordingly, according to their faith of the observations. And there are other ways of finding out. Some people knew from Nepal because they came from the same locality areas. There was a 1 in 10 people, and another 1 in 10 people either knew from Nepal, even though they didn't come from the same area, or found out it abroad through friends and through other means, for example, like looking at the company rosters, other things. That's how they find out. Next slide, please. And one of the questions we asked was about sharing kitchen. Because we wanted to understand the commensality, these practices of relationship when people are away. And on average, 4 in 5 people, at least, in fact, had shared kitchen with each other. With the people from the different caste group, Dalit and non-Dalits. Next slide, please. And we asked a question about if they encounter any caste-based problems between the mates. And the questions were no, not at all, yes, minor, and yes, there have been some level of tension conflicts. Overall, the scenario is that a very small number of people, in fact, had tensions or conflict. As we have seen we'll see in the other slides as well, that and there have been, when we ask people for some qualitative explanation, people didn't bring caste as a kind of the issue or treat people from different castes very differently as people do in Nepal. Here we can see that very 5%, 1%, 4.2% people actually experience this as kind of the tension. Caste being a tension in their relationship. Next slide. Perceived caste. Sorry, can you go back to previous slide? Yeah, perceived caste discrimination exclusion. And we also asked, have you ever had an occasion of to feel caste discrimination, exclusion, prejudice? Large number of people, 10 in 9 Dalits or other people, and they didn't experience it at all. But 1 in 10 people, had some kind of feelings. In Nepali, we asked, we phrase this way. It could be simple, personal feeling. It could be some groups having some kind of organization and others not being invited in those kind of situations. But largely there was not such kind of the feeling of discrimination and exclusion. Next. Then we asked them the question about what happens when they come back to Nepal. Okay, can you treat them in the same way in Nepal as you did abroad? And large number of people, I think on average it was half of the people said no, we can't. And we have given here the division Baun, Chetri, and Janjatis and Dalits, and the large number, 62%, I think about 2/3 said no, we can't treat them in the same way. And there are some explanations given here. We have many explanations, descriptions given why people cannot do that. And they are very short explanation arcs in the quantitative survey. And they say, for example, here, we have to follow our own customs in our own home. Afno garma, afne niyam ma basnu parcha. That was said by one Baun Chetri respondent. Next slide. Right, outside I don't care. At home, because of my mother and father, I can't do the same. Ghar bahira matlab chaina, gharma aayeपछि babaamako karanle sakdina. That was remarks by a Janajati respondent. And one Dalit respondent said, I stayed with friends, worked together, and stayed as if with family. I was treated well. Sathirसँग बस्यो, राम्रो काम गरियो, परिवार जस्तै व्यवहार भयो. That was a remark by a Dalit respondent. And they behave very differently depending on whether they are abroad or in Nepal. After they return to the village, they go right back to their old religious teachings. उनीहरू विदेशमा र नेपालमा धेरै फरक व्यवहार गर्छन् र उनीहरू आफ्ना गाउँमा आएपछि एउटा धार्मिक सोचतिर गइहाल्छन्. So that was the remarks from a Dalit respondents. This shows that people revert back to the old practices to some extent. Some people do change. We didn't try those kind of changes, but this shows that when people are away abroad in a kind of more secularized working condition of the Malaysia and Gulf. I even visited Qatar and UAE, and I met a few people. I asked this question. I've been trying to follow people in Facebook the discussions kind of things, and these findings are very much true. There may be different experiences you have to share, but the kind of the caste relations between people from different caste groups in at least on the basis of Dalits, non-Dalits is not very present in those work environments. But when people come back, those old practices are revived. Next slide. Right. The one thing we tried to do in our survey was to understand in more numerical terms by asking as many as 1,200 people their caste practices. This can be done very different ways. For example, Richard Bones has also tried to understand caste-based untouchability practices, social relationship, commensality ideas. And we have developed these instruments, and we try to understand people's relationship in their own community. And we must keep in mind that these are the self-reported answers, and they're likely to be exaggerated, but we try to be very rigorous, and the people interviewing were from the same community. So we are convinced that there is a large element of truth here. One question we asked was that whether people had occasion to sit on the same mat bench. What we said that the एउटै bench अथवा एउटै गुन्द्रीमा बस्ने मौका मिल्यो कि मिलेको छैन, because whether people are keeping these ideas in mind that okay, I shouldn't be touching somebody or I shouldn't be entering somebody's house. So that was the question, and we differentiated this as in public, outside house, and in somebody's house. Okay, so the results here, the total, I put a red circle here just to make it easy. 55% of the people said, yes, in the past I have sat on the same bench or mat. And that's the home condition, at home. And about 92% people said, yes, I've sat together in a bench or in a mat, Dalit with non-Dalits and non-Dalits with Dalits. Okay, these are the questions related to Dalits. And we also asked that what would you do it if there was an opportunity in the future? And 9 in 10 people say yes, we'd do it. And only 1.3 people didn't want to say. I mean, we gave them an option to say that, okay, I don't want to speak about this question, because some people might not want to, comment on it. So the next question we asked was, okay, sitting together is one thing. How about eating food or drinking tea or water, tossed by each other? And the number here goes down compared to the sitting together at home. Was 55%. Eating together at home is just 30%. And sitting together in public is 92%. Sitting together, eating together in public is 80%. I mean, this public means could be schools. Schools could be party palaces, could be anywhere. It could be restaurants. So there's a big caste contrast here. If you see the Baun Chetris, only 16% of the Baun Chetris said they have eaten together with Dalits at home, compared to 76% in public, and the number of Janjatis at home is almost double there. But 82% people say, okay, in the future, if there is an opportunity, I'll do this. Next slide. Momji, can you remind me of time? I mean, if I need to rush, then I would do that. I can't see how many slides are there, but please warn me about time, okay?
That's okay.
Momji, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, you can present your slide.
Okay, all right, thank you. This is one of the marriage event of a Mizar community, and the man is standing here with his scarf and topi is a priestly Brahmin. He was invited, I was invited as well. So in the next few slides that we will be talking about inviting people to each other's the events and what is going on, what will happen. Can we move to the next one? I mean, this priest was the first one to officiate one marriage program for the Sarki communities. He was the first one. I mean, so far other Brahmin priests hadn't done that. So maybe he has set an example, and hope others will follow. Even though there are some people who would react very negatively as well. Right. Then we asked a question about intercaste relationships, social events, inviting for wedding at home. People living in same community, if these relations are changing for better, would they invite? Have they attended these kind of events? And one was about wedding. In the past, 65% of Dalits said they did invite, and almost all 97% said they would invite in the future. 36% Bound Chatri respondents said they invited Dalits in the wedding. 85% said they would do in the future. The number of Gurungs here is slightly lower. So overall, the future hypothetical, this future is very hypothetical, and we can't take it for granted. Looks like slightly better. How about attending funerals? I mean, this has been a big question that the people living in same community, Dalit, non-Dalit. I've attended many funerals that Dalits have attended non-Dalits funeral. They have gone to funeral procession and to the river, and non-Dalit have done the same to some extent. But what's people's actual experience? 30% of the people we asked, they say yes, they have attended funeral procession belonging to Dalit or non-Dalit caste groups. More Dalits have attended non-Dalits funeral than Dalits, and there have been always issues I've experienced. Our interlocutors have explained to us that the non-Dalits do not want Dalits to toss the dead bodies. But I've seen Dalits carrying logs, attending the funerals. Maybe I think this one is increasing, even though inviting to weddings is more than happening more than attending funerals. Maybe there could be some kind of reversal. And taking and sending bheti at death. Whenever someone dies in your community, and there is a tradition in the part where we did our research to send some support as a kind of the death gift called bheti. And the sending bheti is of course more frequently than attending funerals itself. For example, like in one village, I've seen people deciding that everybody should contribute 100 rupees to whoever dies, in the whole community, Dalit, non-Dalit communities. So 50% of the people said yes, they have sent those bhetis to Dalit or non-Dalit whenever they occur, in different caste groups in the community. And 90% of people said they are willing to do it in the future. So this was more hypothetical situation in the future, just to be better. Next slide. All right, we also asked people about the occupational occupations that they, if they are willing to follow their parents' occupations, for example, traditional occupations. That does not necessarily only mean Dalit occupations. That traditional occupation could mean agriculture. That's why here more than 50% of the people, 55% of the people say no, they are not interested to follow the parents' occupation. Even more bound Kshatriya are saying that. I think that explains why we have got so much barren lands. And as we will show you later in the slides, that there's been a discontinuation of the Baligari systems to the large extent. That also shows that why people are breaking away from the traditional occupations. Next slide, please. Right. I mean, we could have disaggregated this into different Dalit groups, but this is an aggregated form for the Dalits. One of the themes we explore in our survey was skills and learning. A series of skills were identified, and we asked people if they have that skill. And we also asked people if their parents, father or mother, had that skill. And on that basis, we tried to find out the generational change. Here, just picking out some related to Dalits, the iron kukam, iron work, 25% of the people, whole respondents. I mean, this question is not related to Pariyar or Mijars, but this has been just somehow bulked. So I should give you this information here. 25% of the parents had the skills, only 9% of the respondents have that skills. So this is one of the biggest change there. People lost that skill of iron smithery. So the biggest change. Then carpentry skill also has gone down massively. Plow making has gone down to a large extent, and plowing skill itself also has gone down. On the one hand, it has gone down, but all of the bound Kshatris we interviewed, now they do plow. And this relationship of having Dalit as a plowman, that's shifted. And now I've seen Dalit, non-Dalit having kind of the partnership in cropping. And if Dalit household doesn't have a man at home, a woman would go and the bound would plow the Dalit field. So these kind of changes are real. And people even say now that, there was even, I've heard the joke and banters that the bounds and Kshatris are plowing Dalits. So these are happening in reality. And traditional tailoring, by traditional tailoring, what we mean is that, say, in a Baligari system, people, the tailor person, especially ladies, used to come to their client's house, and old, worn-out clothes are mended and repaired. And those kind of skills are decreasing now. It's because I think the ready-made stuffs are found in the market. People no longer are, wearing repaired clothes, and also people not wanting to do those kind of Baligari terms of services. And playing Nomati Baza is one thing that hasn't decreased to the same extent. Many young people have learned. I think there's one skill hiding here, which I can't see in my computer. Modern tailoring. Modern tailoring is in increase. It's because of this sewing cutting trainings in the prolific manner conducted everywhere. The other one is that many Pariyar respondents who had been away to Gulf come back and started their own shops. Some have started business, others have started working in some other people's shops. And modern tailoring, is just on rise. So that hasn't gone down. Next slide, please. Right. In this table, we try to find out. We asked the concerned household that if you are providing services, or if you were providing services in the past, are you continuing with this, or have you discontinued that on the Baligari term? What is the Baligari term here is that you provide service, and at the end of the year, in Mangsir, when people do harvest, they get paid in grain, and the payment could be very minimum compared to the market rates now. So the whole year service, and you have your clients are permanent. You can divide them as a kind of your property. Whenever your brothers are the service providers brothers are separated, then you divide your clients as your property. That used to be the system. Okay, so we wanted to find out whether that's discontinued. And in our survey, 80 households who provided used to provide plowman services no longer do that. And we tried to find out the number of years since they left. One house, I mean, there was a household who left, who stopped doing this from, for 68 years. There's one household, some households just left it last year. So the mean years since the discontinuation happened is 19 years. Okay, and the service receivers, there's 107 households say no, we no longer hire plowman. Okay, provided tailor services, 18 households say, sorry, 12 households say we no longer provide those services, and receiver 55 households no longer receive those services. Blacksmith, also there's been some changes, not to the same extent. And there are some others client pattern client-based systems like Purohit, astrologers, but these are not on the same terms. So that's why there are these abstracts, and there hasn't been much change. I mean, astrologers never used to be on kind of the Baligare terms anyway. They are paid. They always have been paid on this spot, even if in green. Next slide, please. This picture was by our colleague Arjunji, who is in the audience today. This is a tea shop. This is a tea shop, and you can see here people sitting in different locations facing differently. The people on the right are from Dalit communities. There are many Vishwakarmas and Mijars, and the people on the left are Bahuns, Chetris. So even though they are served tea, and so I don't think Dalits are asked to wash their cups, but still people know where their position is. Okay, if a Bahun or Chetri is sitting on the right hand side here, whenever a Dalit comes, they would feel that they need to vacate the position for Dalit there, and they would move to left. Okay, so I don't think this is anything new for the people in the audience here who have very more remarkable experience of their own life. The next slide. But this shows that the kind of separation we still do have, and also the changes. So this is a very interesting quotation. I think very long, but I think this merits reading here, or maybe explaining the shifting relations and the public-private divide. So let me read it. Before 1990, non-Dalits used to invite their halis and other workers to their wedding and other events. People used to be hired to carry boxes, planking, and to help with other work. That was acceptable then. The invitees used to be specific people who expected their roles and participations. So if they were invited, nobody would question them, and they wouldn't question that they would wash the dishes and they just go away. There was not any difficulty inviting them. Since 1990, they started to invite Dalit friends and neighbors as a guest, but this practice is on decline after the elections of 2008. I'm too getting few invitations and no invitations from Bahuns for some times now. Not sure why. Maybe it is because they cannot challenge Dalits who do not wash their dishes after eating. So far, many Dalits organize a separate kitchen for their upper caste guests. I'm not planning any events soon, but I have seen Dalits in my own place not inviting Bahuns to their events. I think it is because if you organize two kitchens, it shows you are reinforcing discrimination against yourself. If you do not organize such a kitchen, they will refuse to eat. If your guests go without eating, it will not look good. So to avoid this, it is better not to invite them altogether. But we know that if you are organizing, for example, like the weddings in the urban centers, party palaces, nobody would question. Nobody would ask who is the cook, chef. Okay, everybody would eat. So that's the wedding at home. Despite having some kind of the public character, are very much seen as kind of private event, and many other cultural events. So that's the kind of the difference we find here, the public-private divide. We see people, recently we interviewed some college students, their colleagues, they're perfectly fine eating at a cafeteria, even inviting people, friends at their room. But when they go home, they can't do the same, repeat the same practice. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Right. I mean, we also wanted to give a little flavor of the income and economic ideas, even though this is a separate topic of its own rights, and we have to do a lot more works. And some of these figures here are very preliminary. But here, in our household census, we ask people their income by sources, and these were very much verified. Unlike national census data, unlike even living standard survey, these were extremely rigorously calculated, but not foolproof, I must say. I mean, it's always very difficult, and the income is one very sensitive thing that people, might not want to disclose, income expenditure. So people were free to participate, not to participate, but still these are very, very, I think, near accurate figures. Right. If we see the remittance here, in each bar, 100% for each caste groups, the proportion of income, each bar represents the proportion of the income. And if you see the longest bar, the color sky blue, that's the remittance. After Gurungs, Dalits' share of income largely comes from remittance. I mean, the previous figures of the highest number of households sending their household members abroad, also a consistent, highest correlation here. Salary income, if you see the salary income, for this, the salary income is very high. The priestly Brahmins is even higher than all other groups. Otherwise, remittance makes up the bulk of the income for all groups. Shall we move to the next one? And on expenses here, if you see the bottom blue bar, that's the food expenses. So each bar represents 100% income for each group. That's divided by the different expenses they incur. So Dalits, large proportion of Dalits' income goes on food plus clothes. But if you see education here, you'll see the difference here. The Brahmin, Gurung, even Kshatris, they spend more of their money. First, they already have got a bigger income than the Dalits, and then they spend larger share on education compared to Dalits here. Shall we move to the next? And one question we asked in our household survey, responded by 512. Okay, this was in the original household survey. The personal family well-being compared to your family's economic status 25 years ago, how do you see it now? So this is general picture of all caste groups included here. 44% of the household respondents said their household income compared to 25 years ago, household economic well-being has improved to some extent. 36% highly improved, and only 15% said no change, and only 4% says degraded to some extent, and 1% 1% said degraded to large extent. I think there's a small error there. So generally, this picture shows that people's well-being and economic status has improved very largely in compared to 25 years ago. This generation is doing better. Next. So how about caste-wise? Okay, that could be interest. These bars on the right-hand sides are Vishwakarma and Mijar, and there's one in Pariyars. And the blue section of each bar is the highly improved, and red is the improved to some extent. If you see Vishwakarmas, for example, more than 80% of the households say that's improved, either highly improved or to improve to large extent. All groups have, these kind of improvements to different levels, and Dalits improvement is even better. That doesn't mean that they are, they have bigger properties, or they earn a lot of money, but this is in relative terms, comparative terms, compared to the past, they're definitely better. Shall we go to next? For this slide, we haven't done any disaggregation by caste, but we also wanted to identify the perceived intergenerational economic mobility. And in our second survey, we included only 347 households, and the 333 households responded on this one. So we asked that people's, based on their memory or whatever impression, that what's the generational change compared to their father and grandfather, and compared themselves and their father. Okay, the questions were asked to the household head. On the father and grandfather side, there is a changes in both sides. Somebody and 40% of the people household thought their grandfather's status was much better than the father's, as opposed to 30% of the people feeling that their father's status was better than their grandfather's. So it could be the case that the father's time there were many brothers, and there's a split of properties and lands and kind of things. But this generation here, father and own self, about 60%. Okay, about 60%, which is 3 people in 5 people thinks that their status is much better, either much better or better than to some extent than their fathers, as opposed to only 23 or 24% of people saying that their father's status was better. I mean, this somehow more or less is consistent to the findings shown by the previous slide. Next one, please. Right, this is a very rough class, caste, economic differences. Okay, please bear in mind this is rough. Okay, rough and ready. And we computed kind of a scale that integrated people's wealth or asset, income, expenses, which is consumption, and surplus, and number of family is family size. Okay, all those were integrated, and kind of the scale was prepared ranging between -0.482. 1 point means like in a way 1 lakh to going up to over 1,000 points, and they were divided into different categories. And they can be done very many different ways, but we should take them as a kind of very much indicative figure. And if you look at here, this is a caste-wise disaggregation of people in different categories: very low, low, middle, low. Three can be grouped as low, and middle, high, and middle could be grouped as a middle, and high and very high could be grouped as a high. And there's a practice in community, and many forest users groups also do this kind of categorization of their community members into the different economic scale. We try to do it 7. They could be collapsed. So I would like to warn you that this is very rough, but this still shows that there are groups in all different categories. All caste groups have at least some people in the some class levels. But if you see the low and very low, for example, Dalit Pariyar here, more than 50% of Pariyars are either low or very low. And if you include middle low, that even goes more than 70%. Compared to, let's say, Gurung priestly bounds and non-priestly bounds, their number in the low or very low category is very, very small. And even middle low category is very small. So this was some kind of not kind of the perfect positive correlation, but this was some kind of the correlation here, a caste class correlation, and shown by a figure. Shall we move to next one? Right. So these are our very preliminary concluding thoughts, and our presentation, unlike many presentations here, we try to present facts and figures what we found here, and we must also warn the fact that there is a great variation throughout Nepal, even for Dalit, non-Dalit, and caste practices. People tend to think that as David also highlighted, that the further west you go, the more conservative society you'll find, and maybe the extent of that practice is less and less as you go towards the east. There could be kind of a rough kind of correlation there. So with the study we conducted is in Kaski. Kaski is a relatively advanced districts. Even Dalits, the literacy rate there in Kaski is 70–80% there, and we didn't present the literacy figure. So these kind of findings, some of the findings may not be generalizable, but some others could be generalized to various extent. And we can discuss and relate this as we go through in our discussion. And we very much would like to hear people's stories and ideas. Yeah. So the point we are making here is international labor migration and Maoist movement are certainly two important factors. And some of the things we haven't presented here, even though we are making some conclusions here, that's why I've written out a paper, that accelerated change in intercaste relations, but gradual change that were underway even before the 1990s also contributed to the creation of an enabling environment. In our research site, there was a kind of the incremental change happening even before Panchayat time. There was a low-level Dalit movements supported by non-Dalits in the underground political parties, and many events happened. Dalit tried to open schools, those kind of things. So these kind of changes were on the air. So certainly the Maoist movement and international migration has brought about big changes, maybe given big impetus to the things that are forming. But things didn't happen in vacuum. At least our field site says that. Second, Dalits and non-Dalits have forged new relations. Okay, we have seen some relationship, but we haven't talked about modern community groups, cooperatives, and various users groups, Upabhokta Samitis. And Dalits and non-Dalits have forged new relations. They work together in mothers groups, cooperatives, saving and credit groups, political parties, citizen forums, NGO programs. And in these groups, these kind of practices are, these kind of caste-based observations are observed in lesser extent than the traditional settings. Next. Right. While intercaste social relations are formally increasingly egalitarian, there is a clear public-private divide, and behaviors demonstrated in one environment do not necessarily translate to the other context. Okay, we have seen that what happens in the Middle East and Gulf, and what happens when people come back, what happens in the school and what happens at home, what happens in the college and what happens when people go back to their house. So this public-private divides, and we can discuss more. And we do have evidence that in the past, when the caste-based rules were enforced by law and people were compelled to practice, and you couldn't say that, okay, I am refusing to practice it, even if you are the so-called high caste. But we have seen that people, for example, like people hiring, minor plowman and the bound plowing himself away from the eyes of the other community members. But now people, I think, try to be politically correct more in the public situations, and they still, many people do still keep on practicing what they did in their private setting. So what happens in the Middle East, not necessarily, that is completely replicated at home, even though maybe, there's some changes in force, of course, and the change also is a very much contested issue point in our field area. If you ask people who experience caste-based discrimination, untouchability kind of experiences throughout their life, if you ask them this question, that what do you think about the change, they say, this is the sea change in my life. I haven't thought about this. Now after the bound boys come to my house and eat. But if you ask educated urban boys, the change is nothing, and they want complete change, And so there are very parallel cases in India. And we can discuss later if necessary. Johnny Perry did a study about the Bilai steel plant, where he found completely, perfectly free caste commensality in the work settings, and those people in the Nokari and calm, those kinds of class setting doing differently. But when they go home, not inviting each other, those kind of practices were observed in India too. And the other point we want to make is the occupational relations are in big decline, but change is not inevitable. Inevitable on unidirectional. Okay, the changes we have seen is not only Dalits not wanting to. Maybe David wants to add something on this point. Unidirectional. So far as I understand, is that the occupational decline, for example, like people not having interest in doing agriculture, the large number of bound Chetri not wanting to go to agriculture is also in similar line to a large number of Dalits not wanting to do smidri or tailoring or in those kind of things, even though there is significant difference about the reasons not wanting to do it. Maybe the idea of respectability more or less is similar there, but it's still people wanting to do away with this kind of occupation is very, very different because untraceability, caste-based relations were very much tied to the occupations, and people didn't want it to continue doing that. But having said that, I've got new experience this year. Corona has reinforced many people, going back to the old occupation, because they needed something to earn, and the urban activist slogans didn't fit them. That was the reality I experienced. There's very big change this year, because I was living in the village. I just came to Kathmandu 3 days ago, and I've seen this new surge in agriculture and even doing the whole occupation, people wanting to earn money. And there is some degree of correlation between caste class. I think we have discussed about this. And at the same time, there are members of all groups in all class categories. And the number 6, which I can't read full here, only a minority of Dalits at local level are politicized in the same way the urban Dalit activists are. Is there next slide? Or maybe that's the end, I think. That's the end. And big thanks to, again, Arjunji, Gopal Nepaliji. Gopal Nepaliji has been together with us in the Dalits in School Curriculum project, which is a very fascinating project. We're trying to propagate based on our finding here, the fact that we try to measure the status of caste, the relationship in the villages, and we concluded that people were still practicing this caste-based ideas to some extent. Untouchability ideas was still there, even though there's been a big changes. Now some of the people working, even following that they are allowed to eat inside. All those people are not allowed inside. But one of our findings or realization was that, okay, as long as the untouchability, caste-based discrimination, caste issue is put only in the side of Dalits, the caste, the improvement, the change we are aiming for, we're not going to achieve, as fast as we want. Okay, the caste problem is broad-based, is multidimensional. In fact, is a dialogical, is a problem of non-Dalits, and they must understand it. They must own it. So we wanted to go for some kind of the action research, and we wanted to try mass education. We have seen family planning campaigns in Nepal. Many people in our audience, myself included, my mother had 9 children, 6 surviving, but I have just 2. This kind of generational changes. I mean, we all know that these caste-based practices is very, very hard to change. And if we wanted to invest something now, even if we get the results in the next generation, we must do it. We must sow the seed. So that's, having that in mind, we designed a school curriculum project. We have tested it in 3 schools, and that was very, very positive. And government of Nepal already realized that this must be dealt with, but that was not systematic. Nobody had studied it before. So we are trying to bring out a reference book soon. I mean, draft has been prepared, but we have been very lethargic and many things in hand. So these are the things we have been doing. The next thing we want to do is to test these ideas to the far west and Midwest. And we are very, very thankful to the Dalit leaders and others who taught us a lot about the Dalit movements and the practices and many things. I think what we're trying to share today is only just to repeat what they said to us. So due and a big credit to them, and thank you, Momji, for the wonderful platform today.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Krishna Adhikari and Professor David Gellner from Oxford University for their in-depth research and findings. Yeah, it has been long, almost more than 1 hour. So I'm not going to repeat again those findings. Of course, it was very interesting findings. And in terms of caste issue in Nepal, it has been deeply rooted in Nepalese society. So your research also has found out that there is variation the caste practices between urban and rural areas, and there has been some changes because of labor migration and the recent political changes in Nepal. So there are so many interesting findings. And now I'd like to hear from our participants in this webinar. And I can see there Dr. Puna Nepali and Dr. Ramesh Sunam, because they are also involved in similar field. If you have any quick remarks on the presentation, I'd like to call Dr. Puna Nepali.
Okay, thank you, Dr.Mom, for providing me these opportunities. And also, I'd like to thank you for the presenters. And actually, they have rightly presented their empirical work that is very much comprehensive. And I have a quick concern to the presenters. First of all, being the anthropologist, just you are also employing the quantitative methods. And in Nepal, the anthropologists are really hesitating to employ the quantitative methods. But from my side, I always prefer. I'm not an anthropologist, but simply the social science students, and also I prefer to employ the both method to understand the ground realities of the research, and actually it's really helpful to understand the whole scenario. And thus I'm trying also expecting whether I'm in the right position or not, or I'm trying to confirm. This is my one concern. And my next concern is that you people are rightly conducting the research considering the caste and class scenario in Dalit movements, and if I am right, the people are only considering the socio-cultural aspects and cultural and caste discriminations, and this research is
I think there is problem with the connection. Punaji, can you hear us?
Wako freeze voice, sir.
Okay, so at the same time, there is one question from Dr. Ramesh Sunam, though he does not like to provide some remarks on it. He's saying that this is seminal work on migration and caste relation. I have not come across the multi-sided in-depth research of this scale in Nepal on this topic. David and Krishnaji, thank you for sharing the key research findings. My question is, results indicated that a tiny proportion of the Dalit migrants faced caste discrimination, caste-related tension conflicts overseas. Could you describe the nature/type of discrimination they faced? Was it related to casteist remarks, hate, untouchability, etc.? Yeah, that was the question from Dr. Ramesh Sunam. Would you like to answer this question, Dr. Krishna Adhikari or Professor David Gellner?
David, maybe you respond to Purna and I'll respond to Sunam.
Okay. Right, thank you. Yeah, on Purna's question, yeah, it's true. Anthropologists are allergic to quantitative methods very often. And some of my students sometimes say, am I even allowed to use statistics and so on? I say, yes, come on, what is this? Where did you get this idea that anthropologists, I mean, even old-fashioned classical anthropologists, would do basic surveys in villages of collecting, counting the number of households and, basic demographic data. So of course you can. And yeah, I think it's a nonsense that clearly the best research is the research that integrates both. We mustn't be slaves to quantitative data. We must be very, very critical of the questions that are asked. And very often the question, depends on, there are certain kinds of things that you can collect quantitative data on very fruitfully and very accurately, and there are other kinds of things where you cannot, and you have to be, and certainly some kinds of, especially when you're collecting questions about attitudes or controversial cultural beliefs and that kind of thing, you have to be very, very careful. The quantitative data may be very deceptive, but for moral, I mean, there is no, I don't think there's any alternative to quantitative data if you want to have, you want to make serious large-scale generalizations, and the anthropological contempt for quantitative data is nothing more than a boundary mechanism to try and protect their own speciality. I mean, I think it's not, look, Bourdieu, who we're trying to replicate some of Bourdieu's questions about cultural capital. Bourdieu's work is full of both kinds of material, and the real problem and the really interesting question is how you integrate the sophisticated qualitative data with quantitative data, and that's a struggle for everybody. And it's we're still struggling with that, but I don't think there's any alternative for serious large-scale research. And I'm wondering, Krishnaji will answer, will give the answer about to Ramesh's question about what kind of, and I think we do have that data in some cases, but maybe we could invite maybe we could invite Arjunji to speak, since he was very much part of this project. He may have some comments on the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gellner. Arjunji, are you there? Or Dr. Krishna, would you like to provide your answer first?
Yeah, on the first one, I think the Purnaji's second concern, we couldn't get it fully. On the first one, I just wanted to add a point that this year I was teaching critical assessment on numerical methods to anthropology PhD students, and my job was to convince them, also to convert them a little bit about, okay, you can also do mixed quantitative the methods in your study, and having literacy would be greatly helpful. So UK Economic and Social Research Council has produced a leaflet for the qualitative researchers that the wide study of quantitative method is very, very important. So mixed method is definitely a very good idea, and people, following, living in different silos, not understanding the others. For example, like those in the qualitative studies are not understanding quantitative, and those in quantitative method are not understanding qualitative. Criticizing doesn't make any sense unless you get the point. So yeah, I concur with David on this one. I think mixing is very, very good. Understanding phenomena, if you got the limited resources, yes, qualitative is very good. But if you wanted to find out whether your findings is spurious, or you only one case ideas, then when you multiply more and more ideas, then quantitative large numbers helps you to understand that in a larger scale. But both systems have merits, and we always trying to follow the mixed method here. And I'm grateful to David that, he's being from the ethnography, he greatly respects, say, quantitative methods. And the Rameshji's question, I'm not quite sure what kind of remarks or caustic nature were asked. I think it's been a few years. I need to check. I think it was about, like, for example, like if you have your roommate has a group of this people from certain districts, and other people being feeling excluded, or commenting about the way somebody spoke, or commenting about somebody's exposing his janai, in those kind of things. But then nothing serious incident was reported to us, and not in all questions we ask people to explain. So I'm not quite sure if we do have details on this. But on my subsequent visits to Qatar and UAE, and even visited to labor camps where people were living together. People had concern about, one guy told us that he has, one Bahun was, Bahun told us that he had two Pariyar brothers from his village, and they are perfectly extending so well, and he's worried that what would happen when he goes back home. So he's, planning to build a kitchen where, the new dining table could be put, so that, he could eat in the dining table, so it will be fine with parents, But yeah, no details on the nature of those tensions or conflicts. Maybe we should explore more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna Adhikari. Arjunji, are you there? Arjun BKG? If not, then there is another question from one of the participants. If you would like to ask some question, then you can raise your hand, other participant as well. So there is one question from Keshav Giri. Not only question, some remarks as well. This is a great piece of work. Thank you, Dr. Krishnaji and Professor David Gellner, for the fascinating presentation. I was curious if the results are replicable to similar rural setting, or even in urban areas elsewhere in Nepal. Also, the most striking part of the research was the scaling of the socio-economic situation, practices, and attitudes over the critical junctures in the history. Krishnaji presented statistical indices showing improvements over time, but there was a contradictory quote in one of the slides. I would really appreciate if you could think through what might have contributed to this contradiction. So that was the question from Keshav Giri. And there is another question from Purna Nepali. He's saying that my question is to understand Dalit inner realities through the intersectionality lens. So far, there are two questions. If any other participants would like to raise question, could you please raise your hands or send your question through chat box? For now, would you like to respond these questions, Professor David Gellner? And
could Keshavji just point out which contradictory quote he's referring to?
He hasn't pointed out any contradiction.
I think
he just mentioned one slide. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'd rather ask through
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for the fascinating presentation. You have shown many indices, socioeconomic, mapping of the perception, and also the economic indices that shows that over the time there has been improvement over the there has been less kind of discrimination, and there have been socioeconomic improvement over the time. But there was one long quote in slide somewhere says that now we do not invite Dalits, if they are non-Dalits, they do not invite Dalits into any ceremony, and vice versa. And you pointed out that that may be because they no longer wash their dishes after they finish eating, or yeah, something along the line. So I was wondering why, on the one hand, there is some improvement, but on the other hand, people saying that there has been a gulf breeding. So if you could explain why there is this contradiction, that would be nice.
Thank you.
Momji, should I put my very small concern?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry for a certain level of the interruption happened at my internet. And also I'd like to repeat the same questions as I put at the chat box. And how can we understand the Dalit inner realities through the intersectionality lens? And actually so far I noticed, and there is only the dichotomy and Dalit with respect to the non-Dalit and non-Dalit with respect to the Dalit. This is the one of the very priority of your research, and it would be a wonderful contribution if we should try to understand the very diversity and heterogeneity within a Dalit community. And my next concern is how can we address this concern of the intersectionality through the policy interventions? And it looks very beautiful to understand the reality, but while looking from the policy perspective, sometimes it has become very difficult to address the multiple level of the oppressions and deprivations that remains across the caste, class, gender, and geography. And if you have any kind of experiences and you are working very hard from the very beginning, and even before I was born, and you have in Nepal and conducting that kind of the research, and I would appreciate if you throw that sort of light from that perspective, policy perspective as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Poonaji.
Shall I say something on those two questions? Maybe others can add. So I'll come to Poonaji's question in a minute, but Keshivji points out, something very interesting, and it is a kind of a paradox, but I think it is found also in India and other places. I mean, essentially, the fundamental point is that we're moving from a system where hierarchy is utterly taken for granted and built in to public interaction. Nobody questioned it in the old days. Different castes sit in different places, and that was publicly acknowledged, and it was even, of course, until 1964 publicly and legally enforced, and then informally kind of officially enforced even after that. And then we're moving from that system to one of equality, where equality is a value and equality of respect is written into law. And so those are two radically different systems, and we're moving from one to the other. And so it's not very surprising that there are kind of a lot of bumps and awkwardnesses along the way. And so, yes, it is a paradox that, certainly anyway, at least, where we did our field work in Kaski district, we always have to have that proviso in mind because clearly things are very different in the far west. There has been massive improvement within the lifetime of the older generation Dalits living today. There's unquestionably huge improvements, both culturally and economically. And yet, as that long quote was very perceptive, very reflective, very sociologically aware, into one of our interlocutors, reflexively reflecting on what had happened over the last years. And so there is this embarrassment and there is this awkwardness. You can't move all in one go suddenly to a completely different system of treating people at weddings, and therefore to avoid the embarrassment of people refusing to eat, which would of course would be very shameful, or having guests who one sends away hungry, and one just doesn't invite them at all. So it's an unfortunate consequence of people not being able to leap in one big fell swoop from the old system to the new one. And I mean, the compromise, of course, is to hold the wedding in town in a party palace where these considerations don't apply. But that's not available to everybody. It's not possible for everybody. It's too expensive for many people. So the consequence is that people avoid the situation. My hope would be that this is a temporary situation, and that over time, maybe within 10 or 15 years, we'll look back and say, oh, that was a period when people avoided each other because they couldn't get rid of these casteist feelings, and that in 10 or 15 years' time, people will look back and say, oh, that was silly. Now we all eat together. But you're right that there is a kind of paradox and contradiction there, that at a time when publicly everybody is supposed to be equal, they are avoiding each other, even when they're close neighbors and otherwise closely connected. But Arjunji or Krishnaji may want to comment further on that. On Purna's question about intersectionality, we did not conceptualize our research using the intersectionality lens particularly, but I think we conceptualized it, originally formulated it using Bourdieu's ideas about cultural capital, which are not inconsistent necessarily. I think they can be made consistent with intersectionality lens. And we wanted to try and find out, is there a separate Dalit subculture, different cultural values perhaps, which would be only part, I stress part of the explanation for Dalit relative backwardness. My tentative, very tentative so far conclusion, I have an open mind about this. I had an open mind at the beginning and I still have an open mind about it, but my tentative conclusion on the basis of the material that we've gathered is that in this area, in Kaski district, essentially the big broad answer is no, there is not a separate Dalit subculture. That basically Dalits share the same values as the rest of society. And we can show this in various different ways in terms of participation in rituals and so on and so on. However, Purna is absolutely right. One of the things he says is, what about divisions within the Dalits? Okay, and one of the problems, and this is when it comes to part of his question about policy, for policy, you need big, clear answers and big, clear recommendations. And what anthropologists tend to do is they tend to answer the consequence of anthropological research is very often things are more complicated than you think. Things are complicated. Now things coming up with a conclusion which says things are complicated is not something which policymakers want to hear. They don't want to hear that they're complicated. They want to hear simple, clear answers. But the fact is, when you dig down deeply, what we may, the final conclusion may be that different Dalit groups have different values. That Vishwakarmas have a certain kind of value, and we have various of our interlocutors have said things, about Vishwakarmas being the bounds of the Dalits, if you like, and have Vishwakarmas having perhaps more investment in the old-fashioned hierarchical values than other Dalit castes. And being more invested in Brahminical types of rituals, for example. Clearly there may be slightly different value systems depending on which Dalit group you're coming from. And that also may vary quite a lot across the country, which is another reason why we wanted to try to replicate parts of this project in the Far West, which is so culturally different. So on the one hand, the answer about intersectionality is, in the very broadest sense, Dalits have basically similar values to the rest of society. They're not a separate Dalit subculture in this area, but that may well be not true in the Far West. It could very well be that, especially in the Far West, where society is so divided, that it is valid to talk about a separate Dalit subculture. And then going down to a much finer grain of sophistication, when you dig down actually different Dalit groups have different value orientations. That may also be the case. And that's something on which our, you know, we have to we have to interrogate our own material even more deeply than we have so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Krishnaji, would you like to respond to some question?
I think David responded them more so well, and what Case of the Greasy has rightly pointed out, a kind of the tensions maybe our data was showing that in our survey results that is there's a kind of more optimistic kind of scenario there. But in the meantime, the qualitative statement we presented, one Dalit leader saying that it would be hard for me to invite. I think David clarified that is people wanted to invite each other, but people also want to do things in more respectable terms. Okay, inviting and attending is one thing, our quantitative table so that, and people want to do it more in the future. That's why I think it's much more easier to do things in the party palaces than at home. But we have seen both practices. I've seen some Dalits been invited to non-Dalits house and they're eating together. But there are not many cases, and non-Dalits going to Dalits programs and eating there, but not many cases. But many events, the people is still organizing 2 kitchens, kind of things happening. As long as attending funerals is concerned, I think it's more and more increasing, sending bhetis. The wedding, the kind of events where the eating involves, I think people want in more respectable terms. We have seen the school environment changing, college environment changing, but when it comes home, it is still hard. So the kind of the tension remains there. But we are optimistic that I think with people participating in more and more in kind of the organizations, on the one hand there is difference and the separations, on the other there is a coming together and participating together. So this tension is surely going to be a very much issue, I think, for the next few years to come, as we deal with and educate people. So I think there's a right tension, but people are more optimistic. They want to do better. And at least, people, you ask question that what do you think about the untouchability caste and these kind of things. I haven't seen anybody who said, oh, this is the right thing to do, even if they do it. So I think people are building their own perceptions differently. So in terms of intersectionality, I think just to add, as David said, we didn't devise this research to understand intersectionality more than what we do have at the moment. We were interested and very much influenced by this idea of Dalit non-Dalit divide on traceability. But having said that, in terms of cultural capital, we have explored in qualitative way and capture and even measure the extent of their prevalence and change in society. Different groups skill in different things. Certainly Vishwakarma's skills differ from Pariyar's, and Mijar's skills differ from Bounds. Those kind of differences are there. In our Voodoo kind of analysis of the cultural test, yes, David is right that there is some, there are very small generational differences of the tested, but otherwise we didn't find any significant differences between the caste groups when it comes to the cultural products of the, like music, those kind of things. Obviously, reading culture, educational level, and there's a differences out there. Maybe there is more analysis we could do in terms of gender. We have done that. So policy, how to put these research findings into policy practices is always a big question. I think maybe we need a separate discussion on this one. It's always a big question. And I gave you one example that what we could do in terms of changing, informing our research to informing to policies through the school curriculum which is, I think, directly practically addresses, what we found from our, social condition and how that could be addressed in one way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna Adhikari. So I would like to invite more questions from participants. Are there any questions? Okay, Dal Sunar, he has raised hand. So Dalji, would you like to ask question? Dal Sunarji.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mom sir, for the opportunity. Previously, Dr. Krishnaji mentioned slightly about the optimistic situation of for the generation. Like my concern is, yeah, there in your presentation, there is a high gap, like from the past and future situations. In past, it's somewhere, it shows the situation, but for the future, it's too much optimistic. Are there any kinds of discussions you made during your survey or in your discussion, like that could derive, that could deliver some of the insights, so that why they think the situation would be more positive or improved, or if that not that doesn't improve in the future, what hinders them to improve in the future. So I would more interested to do little discussion on that part of, when it comes to around there are 80%, and some of the aspects there are 91% that people, the respondents, think they would do in the future. um, yeah, I would be more interested to hear about that.
Thank you, Dal Sunarji. There is one question in chat box. Gomu Sam, he or she, I don't know, yeah, asked question. How important is the need and usefulness of the term Dalit in research? Is the term useful in socio-cultural context? That is the question. And there is another participant who has raised hand. Sita Rosaili, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you so much, Momji, and thank you, both of you, Professor. It's an excellent presentation, and it's really interesting. And it was quite interesting for me because I did Baligare Pratha and its impact on Dalit community in 2008 from SNB. And also my master's thesis was Intercaste changing relation. It was based on Sira, but I think I believe Hill Dalit and Tarai Dalit's situation is completely different, so we cannot compare. I have one question, like for both of you. What do you think about the level of discrimination, whether it is decreasing or increasing? What do you suggest the strategy to reduce caste discrimination in Hill Dalit even and Tarai Dalit as well, and even it's increasing in globally. We are in Australia, so in Australia also we face such type of discrimination. And one of our colleagues, he has own home, and they mention if their neighbor, they have some worship or puja or any like marriage celebration, anything, they don't invite them, especially for Griya Puja, entering new home. So this type of practice is still in practice in even in globally. So as Dalji he mentioned, it's quite optimistic, and for future, it's hypothetical. So how do you justify that Kaski's research in, if we compare in globally or in Tarai district? Thank you.
Thank you. There is one more question. Keshav Giriji, again, he has raised hand. Do you have any more question, Keshavji?
Yeah, thank you. I have one more question. There have been many factors in changing attitude of people towards caste-based discrimination. What could be a big thing could be a political change, Maoist insurgency, also education level of people, and one major driving force also has been the migration, as you mentioned in your presentation. So now in the post-COVID scenario, it doesn't seem we can see the end of the tunnel, but still when imagining post-COVID scenario, I guess there would be a lot of people will be returning home, on your research also you mentioned that people tend to be less discriminatory when they are in overseas, and when they come back home, then they are abiding by rules followed by their parents and grandparents. So what would be the scenario? Would we see increased level of discrimination because since they come back to their villages and their family, would you predict, predict wouldn't be suitable word, but would you see more kind of discrimination in the future? Thank you.
Thank you, Keshavji, for your question. I think there are no more questions. So Professor David and Dr. Krishna, would you like to respond to those questions?
Right, David, shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Right, okay, I might have missed, there were several questions here. Dal Sunarji's question about optimistic future. I think on this slide, yes, are we optimistic in terms of incremental changes, even if that's very tribal? Yes, we are optimistic, but I think we caution about the future tendency people express, because that's only hypothetical. So what we try to take away from our research was based on what is happening in the present rather than the future. So you're right that there's a big gap zone and the big jump. I don't think it will go in that line so easily. So even if people tend to show their attitude to be optimistic, it is hard to justify in the short term. So we caution on that one. So we're not arguing that the future is going to be extremely optimistic, as people said. But at least we saw that what people wanted to express. If I miss anything, David can pick it up, and or if David differs, it's fine. Goma Sam is a Dalit term in research is useful. I think I'll leave this to David to respond. I only would like to quote one research finding last year. Richard presented in his survey in somewhere in central Nepal. 90% of rural people didn't want, rejected the term Dalit, at least in the practical context. Okay, so the Dalit term is an extremely useful tool to fight for the right for the Dalits, and this is in Constitution. So I think we have to accept what is there, but I think I'll leave it to David to reply. Sitaji did very interesting works in Tarai. Unfortunately, even though I have done some work in Tarai, but for different kind of research and government cooperatives, but not on Dalits. So in our current research, we're trying to at least understand the scenario in one of the Tarai groups in mid or far west part of Nepal. Yes, you're right that what we find out may not be necessarily applicable in Tarai. Of course, Nepal's, even though many features and the ideological ideas, what guides, caste observations and behaviors is the same, but there is a very huge regional and local differences. And we must be very careful to extrapolate and generalize ideas from one place to another, unless they are analytical level. And what do you think on traceability decreasing or increasing? I think untouchability will just decrease. There's no doubt to me on that one. To what extent? How fast? That's the thing we can question. It can be very slow, and the pace could be much slower than we need it to be. But yes, there will be different. And global increase, and the example you gave, I think I don't take these examples as a kind of increase. I take these kind of examples as kind of the growing visibility and understanding of the situation. The situation in the past was much more grave, uncomparable, and the experiences people had and lived through is something we cannot even explain by words. So you're right that it exists everywhere. Even in the UK, Mitra Pariyar did some study, and he shown us the light that these problems exist there. I did a study about Fiji Nepalese, and we published a book edited by David, and there was a chapter I wrote with a colleague from Australia. Very, very interesting case of Fiji. I'm sure you have already studied about it, but if you haven't, it's a good case to understand that, the kind of the caste hierarchical system order we have here, that's completely disappeared there. Everybody has become Singh, and these things had disappeared. But that's the very old thing, the previous generation, people had no option but to cooperate to each other, marry to each other kind of things. But yes, present level, wherever we go, caste unborn or something, Mitra told, so maybe it exists somewhere. But my personal view is that it's not the increase, it's the more growing visibility. Even in the so many cases, Nepal's most horrendous case happened in this year here. But I think the situation was more severe in the past. And Giriji, question was, okay, the people coming back, returning, more and more people returning, would the situation be worse or better? I don't think situation would be worse. Even if these people are compelled to revert to the old practices, they are at least, they will at least remember what they did away from home, and they will not add to what is going already there in the villages, in the house. Maybe they will help to soften, even if it's a marginally 0.01% to say in the numerical, term. The situation they won't make the caste relations, in terms of caste discriminations, worse than what it is there. That's my total personal feeling. So it's over to you, David.
Okay, thank you, Krishna. Just to add a little bit, I pretty much agree with everything Krishna said about. Well, on the usefulness of the term Dalit or not, there's a brilliant essay which I recommend to everybody by a famous old American sociologist called Robert Merton, and the essay is called "The Self-Fulfilling Prophecy About Ethnic Stereotypes," and very much still applicable to the present day. Brilliant essay. And he starts that essay by quoting another American sociologist called W.I. Thomas, who said, if people define situations as real, then they're real in their consequences. So if well, I mean, and this is untouchability is a great example of that. If we may know that this is all a human invention, But if people define these things as real, then they're real in their consequences. And so this, this clearly applies in the present case. Yes, especially among rural Dalits, the term Dalit is not popular at all, many people don't like it. But unfortunately, there isn't an alternative, and it's written into the Nepalese constitution, and so willy-nilly we have to use it, but while being fully aware of its drawbacks and so on, and what it covers and what it hides. But in creating a Dalit identity, inevitably, inevitably there are clashes with with other, the internal, and we're very familiar with this from India as well. But I think if you compare it to the situation of Dalit populations in Pakistan or Sri Lanka, where there's a complete denial, a legal and political denial of the existence of the problem, I think you will agree that it's actually much better, and despite the problems with the term, it's much better to have it out in the open and to have it explicitly discussed. So, I think we have to use it. And one interesting fact, an ethnographic fact, I have systematically asked taxi drivers in Kathmandu over the last 15, 20 years, do you know the term, well, can you please explain to me the term Janajati? Can you please explain to me the term Dalit? And what is very interesting, doing a cross-section, and that's a very good sample, if you like, of working class Nepalis from a large different number of caste backgrounds. Almost invariably, everybody knows what the term Dalit means, okay? Because it corresponds to a pre-existing social reality. The term Dalit, everybody knows what they may not like it, they may not think that it's a good term, but everybody knows what it means because it corresponds to some very important, already existing social structural divide. By contrast, and very interestingly, among the kind of uneducated or relatively non-political ordinary people who tend to become taxi drivers, the term Janajati is not recognized. Even now, and only about 50% know what the term Janajati actually means in political discourse. That may be surprising, may be very surprising, but it is a fact, and a fact that I can back up with some considerable quantitative data. I haven't published on it yet, but I'm planning to do so. So that is an interesting fact. So the term Dalit has caught on. It does exist, and we have to use it. But we have to keep in mind always the reservations that people have about it, and why not have a term which is actually more positive, which draws, there are many. It's very understandably people want to replace it by some term like Shilpi that actually reflects a more positive identity. I completely understand that. On the question about is it. Yeah, on the Terai, absolutely accept that the situation in the Terai is very different, and the position of Dalits in the Terai is very different. On one of my research trips, I happened to be in South India, and then I traveled to North India, and I spent some time in Eastern UP, and then I crossed over the border, and Krishna and I were doing some work in the Nepalese Terai, and it was very striking. On that trip, I visited the village that M.N. Srinivas made famous in his classic ethnography, The Remembered Village, which I strongly recommend to everybody. If you haven't read it, it's a wonderful read. Reads like a novel. And I visited in Karnataka, they still call them Harijan. So I visited the Harijan Basti in the village where M.N. Srinivas did his original fieldwork back in the late 1940s, second half of the 1940s, and then wrote about it 20 years later. In that village, it was very, very striking. The Dalits were relatively well off, relatively educated, relatively confident. They looked healthy. They were, and it was very, even though obviously they still have a very separate identity, but it was very striking. And then I visited Eastern UP, and with my colleagues from Gorakhpur, we attended a school, a Vivekananda school for Dalits, specifically, particularly targeted at Musahas in Eastern UP. And then from there, we went to I went across the border, as I say, and we were doing some research in the Rupandehi district. And during that research, we visited Musahar Basti in Nepal, within Nepal, and the level of deprivation and poverty, you know, even as you went from south to north, got worse and worse. So that I'm purely impressionistic, because it's not based on research as such, but purely impressionistically, I would say that the Nepalese Musahas were even worse off than those in eastern UP, who were then much worse off than the Harijan Basti in the south of India. So yes, we badly need research on the Terai Dalits, yeah, I'm very glad that some Nepalis are doing it, but you know, even the good research that we have, anthropological, deep and systematic anthropological research we have so far, is all on Hill Dalits, and so that we really badly need to address that lack. On the question, you know, is it increasing? Krishnaji already mentioned Mitra Parya. Mitra Parya was my student for 2 years in Oxford before he went on to do his PhD at Macquarie University in Australia. He has written, yes, I recommend his chapter in the book that I edited called Global Nepalis, which is all about the persistence of caste in the UK. And of course, it's very galling for Dalits to come to the West, supposedly egalitarian West, and especially it's galling to hear Westerners say, oh, we're not like the East. And then it's even more galling to have their fellow countrymen say, oh, we've come to the West, there's no caste here. And then they try to rent a room, and suddenly they find that they can't rent a room, or they have rented a room and then they're asked to leave again because some excuse is made up about some friend coming from Nepal and they need the room back and so on. So Mitra has documented this, and in the chapter in Global Nepalis, he's also documented it in a working paper called Caste in Bone, which you can download off the internet from the Compass web page which is part of my department. So those are exactly the same problems that Dalits face in Nepal as well, of course, but it's the idea that suddenly these problems disappear when you come to the West is nonsense, I'm afraid, and it's very much there. And just recently there's been a lot of publicity about caste discrimination against Dalits in California, in big high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, and the same as the House of Lords in the UK has documented anti-Dalit discrimination within the UK by within Indians in the UK, many of whom are in complete denial about this fact happening and who have resisted very hard. Their spokespeople have resisted very hard having caste discrimination included in the under the protected characteristics, that is to say, those by law, in other words, where discrimination is not allowed. Whereas it's plainly obvious to anyone who has actually studied the thing in depth that clearly caste discrimination is exactly the same as discrimination on the basis of race or any other protected characteristic under British law. Just one final thing: is it increasing or decreasing? I agree with Krishna. I think what's happening is it's becoming more visible, and precisely because it's being resisted, you are having these incidents of violence, really shocking violence, and that's been documented already for India. If you look at the book on India by Mendelssohn and Vijayani about the Dalit movement in India, they show quite clearly that as the Dalit movement has become more successful, Dalit atrocities have also increased. So it's a horrible thing to say, and it's a horrible thing to think, but these Dalit atrocities that we've seen this year in Nepal are a sign that the Dalit movement is getting somewhere. It is making progress. It is actually, and this is part of the resistance to it, but and obviously the efforts need to be redoubled. But it is, I'm afraid, that is the reality. I dare say we will find out more especially about the Rukum incident, as more facts come out, and that will be very interesting to see and to know. So yeah, that's it's never, the path to social harmony will never has done and is not going to run smooth. There is going to be politics and contention in this all the way, and we should expect that.
Is that do you have any more response, Professor David, or have
No,
you?
That's it. I think I've addressed.
Okay.
All the points. Much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. There are no more questions from participants. With this, your response from both of you, Professor David Gellner and Dr. Krishna Adhikari. I'm now going to conclude today's webinar series. It was very insightful and in-depth research. We have been benefited from your research findings. And in the future as well, I'd like to have more conversation around same issues. And we have also few more series of webinar on caste and other issues of Dalit communities. So I'm very thankful to all the participants who have been here throughout the 2 hours of sessions, more than 2 hours indeed. And I'm really thankful both of you, Professor David Gellner and Dr. Krishna Adhikari, for your time and contribution. And thank you all. And now I'd like to conclude this session. Thank you. Namaste.
हामीलाई अवसर दिएर धन्यवाद।
तपाईहरुलाई पनि धेरै धन्यवाद।
अवसरको लागि
धन्यवाद। नमस्ते।
नमस्कार।